Welcome to episode 23 of More Than Just Maps. I'm your host, Ollie Powers. This podcast was created with the intent to help anyone in the GIS field get from where they are now to where they want to be that your first job, a career move, or just improving your GIS game overall. On this week's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Toby Soto of Soto Media and GISSuccess.com. Toby got his start in the industry through surveying and drafting while at the city of Riverside, California. It was there this cool new thing called GIS was starting to take off, and Toby jumped in with both feet. His career eventually led him to the county level and several other cities, and all that without a 4-year degree. We chat about how networking is key for promotions and finding your next job, and he even gives us some tips for introverts. And now for part 1 of my interview with Toby Soto. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today I'm joined by Toby Soto of Soto Media. You might know him better from GISSuccess.com. Welcome, Toby.
Hey, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Been looking forward to this.
Yeah, we've been trying to get you on here since actually last year, so I'm glad this finally happened.
Yeah, I know. It's been, quite a year. 2020 was just kind of a show. Let's just put it that way,
That's a nice way of putting it.
We're gonna keep it PG,
Yeah. So let's dive in. So, how did you get started in GIS in the first place? Let's go back to where it all began.
Where it all began. It's kind of an interesting story. My family background is all in engineering and land surveying. So I've always been accustomed to having maps around the house and, survey equipment and things like that. But, never really had any major interest in any of that type of stuff. And having it around the house a lot, and then, the family has the background in it, you just kind of end up like diving into civil engineering. And so, during high school and my summers and spring breaks, I would go to work with my dad, and he would show me how to erase ink off of Mylars and practice my lettering and make copies and all that kind of stuff that you would do as a little rug rat. And so that's how I kind of like got into civil engineering and drafting. So when it was time to go to college, I was like, all right, I'm going into civil engineering. This is what I'm going to do. And I thought I was going to be really great and load up on a bunch of courses and get out of college early. But I hate to say that my first semester, I failed. I bombed out. I actually burnt out and quit college. And
oh, wow.
So my parents were like, well, you got to do something. If you're not going to college, you got to get a job. So I was lucky enough to get a job with the company that my dad worked for, the civil engineering company. And so I started drafting. I started, doing the drafting work there. And then one of the summers I was a journeyman for their survey crew. And so I learned about land surveying. And that was probably the funnest job I ever had, just going out in the field and beating hubs in the ground and doing level runs and transits and things like that. That was a lot of fun, but I learned a lot from that. But over time though, with the economy, civil engineering is just up and down. And it's like, we've gone through this road so many times with the family where it's like your recession hits and then dad loses a job and you're struggling. And I'm like, I don't want to do this. And then at about that same time, the economy was tanking. And so this was like the late 80s, early 90s. And so I got laid off and I'm like, oh, great. What am I going to do?
Which is the best feeling in the world.
Yeah, so I'm like, well, at least I still lived at home. And so I'm like, well, I guess I'll just have to go to college a little bit more, because I was going back full, part-time.
Okay.
Retaking those failed courses.
Yeah.
And also taking engineering courses, which kind of like, kept me motivated. And so I just started going back to school full time and started taking my general ed. And there was a internship opening at it's called the Local Agency Formation Commission. That's with the County of Riverside. Basically that company or that section of the county, that department, they maintain the annexations for all the cities within the county. And so they had these paper maps and mylars that they were trying to maintain all these annexations to all these cities. And so I had legal description experience. So they hired me to start drafting all these city annexations. And so probably about 2 months in, they're like, the county's got this program. It's called GIS. Have you ever heard of it? I'm like, no, I've never heard of GIS. I have AutoCAD background and all that, and they're like, well, they said that, they would teach you how to use it. In return, we get these like really nice paper maps. So you want to do that? I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. Why not?
Sounds like fun.
So, yeah. So in GIS, I just kind of fell into it. So I remember going over to the county building and, there's these guys in the basement and it's super dark and they got these big giant terminals and it's all like green screen and they just taught me how to use ArcInfo. And I thought, oh my God, this is the worst program in the world. I hated it. I hated GIS.
Definitely not what it was or what it is today.
No, not even close. And so, I'm learning Kogo and learning how to do, traverses and closures and all this kind of stuff on the system and create these maps for the for LAFCO. And so just over time, a full-time position opened up. And back then they were called engineering techs. There was no such thing as GIS specialists or GIS analysts. And so I got hired. So I was like, oh, sweet. Now I got my full-time job doing GIS and, I'm going in parcels and center lines. And
so had you finished school yet or you were still just doing part-time?
No, still doing part-time, school. And so I did transfer to a 4-year at the time too. So I ended up with my associate's degree and transferred to a 4-year. But so I worked my way up, in the system there for a few years. And then my boss, my supervisor there left and went to City of Anaheim. And he was like the lone GIS person there. He was going to be the GIS manager. And so after the first year there, he pulled me and another person over to Anaheim to help implement GIS for the city out of their public utilities department. So that's where I really cut my teeth into GIS because at that time ArcMap 8 came out. And so I really dug into ArcObjects and customizing ArcMap with extensions and doing auto attributing.
A little better than ArcInfo, eh?
Yeah, it was quite the leap, because it was, their first Windows-based program, in ArcInfo. So there was a lot of bugs to be had, and SDE had just come out, and was it map objects as well. And so there's huge learning curve, but it was really fascinating time because you got to play with all this new technology and you just started making things happen. And, staff was actually able to use a web browser to view GIS information that you've been holding back, just producing maps to show them, So it was a really exciting time and I really enjoyed it. And that's really where my GIS flourished, was there with Anaheim. That's really like the basic, story of behind how I got into GIS.
That's pretty cool. So you didn't go the traditional route, like, hey, okay. I mean, a lot of people I talk to, myself included, go to school for something else and then find GIS at school and then switch to that. And you just found it through work, which is another awesome way to get into the industry. And I like that. And it's good to show that people, you don't necessarily have to, I mean, it's great to have an education, something, but you can still learn it on the job and be just as successful with it as anybody else.
Yeah. And you know what? Something that probably a lot of people don't know. I don't have a 4-year degree. I never finished my 4-year degree and never have a master's. I took a couple extension courses for what I needed for programming. And I ended up getting married and having kids, and that took over my life. And so, but I just had the work ethic to keep pushing myself to the next level,
So would you say that, I know a lot of people would be like, go to school, get your degree, that'll help you and that'll open doors. Did you find that it was harder for you to get positions because you didn't have a 4-year degree?
No. And here's the reason why, is because GIS was so early that, they really didn't know what they needed or what they wanted. And so they would just kind of copy the same job description from the next county over, the next city over. And there really wasn't a degree,
Fun
that
fact, they're
was
still doing
specific for
that.
GIS, So, you may have like, preferred degree in planning or preferred degree in engineering, and surveying. And so, but I had just enough experience that, I would bypass the HR and get in,
Nice. Okay. So it's definitely possible. I mean, they're still copying job descriptions from other from other places. Nobody makes up their own. And they're definitely still putting degrees that have nothing to do with GIS on it.
Yeah.
But it's definitely possible if you can get your foot in the door somewhere and get enough experience and show that you're good enough, you don't necessarily need that degree.
But here's the other key too, though. I mean, just because you do a great job doesn't mean that you're going to have the possibility of getting a promotion or finding another job in another city. The other key too is networking, being involved in GIS through user groups and through different organizations and nonprofits and, presenting at conferences and things like that. Getting yourself out there and networking really helps, because every job that I applied for, half the panel already knew. And so if you don't think that that's an advantage, well, it's a huge advantage, because maybe some of the things that you forgot to mention in your interview, they already know in the back of their head. Oh yeah, he does this and this and this. So, it kind of fills those gaps, when you're trying to put your best foot forward in the interviews. And so, having that clout, having the people there that support you and know who you are, just makes it that much easier to get that other job.
And I'm sure it also helps with just nerves, like knowing the people that you're interviewing with makes the interview itself so much easier.
Yeah.
The best interviews I've had is when, hey, I actually know almost everybody in the room, and you're not at that point, you're not in an interview, you're just having fun with people.
Right.
Yeah, you might come out with a job.
It's like, oh yeah, you wanted to know my background. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you.
Oh yeah, we should tell you this.
So it's doable, but again, it's really important to network. It's really important to get yourself out there, get people to know who you are and what you do, and that they can read you like, okay, you are a go-getter. You are someone who, makes things happen and understands the technology, understands the purpose and the business need, and that's the kind of person we need. So I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, for certain interviews and those positions.
So what would you say I think it's easier said than done to actually go out and network. If you're an extrovert person naturally, that's probably a lot easier. What if you're more of an introvert person, but it's still important to go out and network? What do you have any advice for people who don't necessarily want to just put themselves all out there?
Sure. Like I know now with COVID, it's a little bit different because everything's kind of online, but when we used to have in-person meetups and things like that, you didn't have to actually go up and present, but even like during the breaks or before and after the meetups, if there's somebody that is of interest to you and you're interested in the things that they've done, just go up to them and talk to them. You're not talking to the whole group, you're just having a one-on-one conversation with that person. And most of the time, the groups will go out to lunch afterwards and, go with the group and just kind of mingle in and listen. You don't always have to talk, but, just listen to what's going on, be present, and, just try to make contact with some of those people that are of interest to you, because, most of the people are very willing to give you information, to share their knowledge. There's very few that I've met along the way that are like coveting everything that they've learned. Those people are probably more insecure with themselves. But most everyone I know have always been like, yeah, let me help you. Try this, try that. Talk to this person. Go go over here for that resource. It's always been like an open book, when you finally reach out to those people.
Yeah, and that's the big thing that I've also noticed in the GIS community is there's so many people who are willing to help you. Call up somebody that you know works there, say, this is my problem, can you help me? Either, yes, they can, no, I don't know, but here's somebody I know that can help you. And they will help you along the way. Everybody's just really, really wants the industry itself as a whole to be strong. I feel like part of that is because there's some professions that don't view GIS still as a real profession itself. This is going to go back to your earlier days. If you talk to people who are actually land surveyors, a lot of them don't think GIS is its own thing yet. Still.
Yeah. No, that is funny. That is a very cliquey group,
Yeah.
The surveyors. And then the funny thing is, at the County of Riverside, that's where GIS started, was in the survey department. We had licensed land surveyors that were overseeing, GIS. That was really important that they were licensed land surveyors. So, but yeah, you'll find your cliquey groups. That's surveyors, definitely one of them.
Not to bash on surveyors by this.
No.
It's just funny.
Yeah, I mean, those guys like to have a good time, It's there's few that take it really seriously, and try to covet everything that they have and don't believe what you're doing is valid. So they start getting into what's the accuracy of it? Well, is it okay if it's just a couple tenths of a foot off, on the map?
Yeah.
You're not doing as-built off this stuff.
No.
You're not building, curb and gutter and stuff off of it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and there's a time, like you're just saying, there's a time and place for that, and there's a time and place for GIS and getting the information out there in a way that people can digest and make decisions off of, versus here's a survey, which most people will look at and be like, I don't know what I'm looking at.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Toby.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Join us again in a couple of weeks for part 2, where we talk about the difference between government and consulting work, starting your own blog, the importance of leadership support, and learning leadership skills as early as you can.